We're joined by criminal defense attorney Sarah Azari, former federal prosecutor Mitchell Epner, and Mark Caputo, national political reporter for The Messenger. Mitchell, this was not a civil trial. This was a civil trial, not a criminal one. So, as Sloan was just talking about, that's a much lower burden of proof.
Correct. The proof on this case, on most of the accounts, was preponderance of the evidence, which means 51-49. There were on the defamation claims, there were a couple of pieces that needed to be proven by clear and convincing evidence. That's somewhat higher, but it is still below the criminal standard, which is beyond a reasonable doubt.
And Sarah, the jury found Trump liable of sexual abuse of E. Jean Carroll, but not rape. What do you make of that?
So, in November 2022, the New York legislature passed the Adult Survivors Act, which essentially says that if there is a criminal offense under the New York Penal Code, then the defendant could be liable civilly if there is. And so there was a special verdict form here where the jury was given the choice between rape, sexual abuse, and I think one other sexual battery.
But does that mean to you that they didn't make their case, or were they splitting the difference? It's right in the middle.
Yeah, so Elizabeth, I think the rape charge was very defensible. I think there was a consent defense there that couldn't be brought because Trump essentially flat out denied ever knowing this woman. That was the promise. I think the jury was saying, we don't really think it's rape, but it's something. Something happened.
Your head.
Yeah, so the testimony from E. Jean Carroll was extraordinarily graphic with regard to the sexual abuse, meaning the insertion of his fingers.
It was rape.
Which
she described.
So let me be really clear. Her testimony was very clear about Trump inserting his fingers inside of her and rummaging around. That was something that came across with remarkable vivid color. She then testified that after that, he put his penis inside of her, and she was much hazier about that. And this is pretty clearly a compromise verdict of the jurors who were absolutely convinced within 2 hours that there was a sexual assault, but they did not believe at the end of the day that it was an assault with his genitals, it was an assault with his hand.
One of the ways that Trump had attacked E. Jean Carroll when this allegation was made was to attack her appearance. He said repeatedly, she's ugly, she's not my type, which set up this stunning moment from his deposition when he himself was given a photo of himself and Carroll back in the late 90s when the attack happened. Take a look. That's the photo. Do we have the clip? Okay, I think we don't have the clip, but at any rate, we'll leave the photo up for a second. You can see Ivana Trump, his first wife, and then you see the blonde E. Jean Carroll in the late 90s. And now we'll take a look at the clip.
I don't know who, it's Marla.
You say Marla's in this photo?
That's Marla, yeah, that's my wife.
Which woman are you pointing to?
No, that's
Here.
Carroll.
Oh, is that,
the person you just pointed to was E. Jean Carroll.
Who is that? Who is this?
Point, your wife. And the woman on the right is your then wife,
I don't know.
Ivana?
This was the picture.
Ivana.
I assume that's John Johnson. Is that
That's Carroll?
Because it's very blurry.
So he initially identifies E. Jean Carroll as Marla Maples, his second wife. How much do you think that hurt him, Sarah?
I think it hurt him incredibly because, look, it's disingenuous. First of all, there's nothing blurry about that picture,
right.
no matter what lens you're looking at it in. And also, she's ugly, I wouldn't touch her, and all those things that he said that were ridiculous, but looks so much like his wife that, it's somebody he would marry.
Yeah. All right, let me go very quickly to Mark. How do you think that this not guilty verdict of liability will impact him in his third run for the White House?
Yeah, that's one of the big questions with Donald Trump, as we constantly say, while this is unprecedented, right? He got indicted in a case out of New York. There's some other criminal matters hanging over him or potential indictments. Now this, I don't remember seeing this with a major party candidate for president. That having been said, Donald Trump has a pretty iron grip on a certain portion of the base of the Republican Party, and they generally believe him no matter what, and they see any sort of criminal or legal problems against him as an unfair political attack, which is what he talks about.
Right.
But that's in a Republican primary. In a general election, though, assuming he makes it out of the primary, one of the problems that has haunted Donald Trump is this sense among a lot of those swing voters, it's not a lot, but it's enough to swing an election, that they believe he's too exhausting, there are too many problems, there's too much smoke, there must be fire. And so this can be piled on top of that and certainly could be problematic. Now, that's just kind of speculation and informed speculation just based on what we've seen play out with Donald Trump in the past, including the 2020 election, and certainly in this current primary, in this current election cycle, where Democrats are talking about it. Like, look, this is going to be a problematic candidate, and some Republicans are privately talking about that as well, this being a general election liability.
Right. Mark, we saw that after he was indicted on 34 felony counts, his support actually went up. His poll numbers went up. He solidified his support and his lead over Ron DeSantis, expanded his lead over DeSantis.
That's true. Now, there are some problems with that New York case, which even some liberal media, or better said, liberal legal scholars will discuss. So we'll see how that plays out. But there's just a number of these things that over time are just going to pile up on each other. Now, I doubt any of his Republican primary opponents are going to be bringing this stuff up. However, it's a pretty good bet that this is going to come around full circle or become a really big issue in a general election if Donald Trump makes it out of the primary.
And does it matter, Mark, that Carroll is now just one of dozens of women who have accused Trump of sexual misconduct? When you talk about it starting to pile up, does it make an impact, or is it just a New York story and a New York jury that didn't vote for him, you know, in the last presidential election? So it's all, as he calls it right now today, he calls it the greatest witch hunt of all time and, quote unquote, a disgrace.
Well, I don't know. That would probably take a lot of time and a lot of study. But what I can say is that once you start to kind of add these things together, it just becomes a very large weight, a very large burden for Donald Trump to carry. Now, if there's any candidate who's been successful at carrying the burden of lots of controversies, it's Donald Trump. However, as we saw in 2020, he wasn't able to carry it across the finish line. This is a different election. It's a different electorate. There's a lot more it's a much different cycle than we faced in the past. But also, again, we've just never seen a major party candidate who's under indictment in one place, under criminal investigation in at least two other places, and then just had a finding of liability that he sexually assaulted someone and defamed them. It's just uncharted waters, and I guess that's one of the more common things we say these days.
Yeah, you can say that again. Okay, very quickly, Mitchell. One of the things that Trump's lawyer said he wants to appeal on is the fact that that Access Hollywood tape was allowed to be admitted into the trial. Does he have any standing there for appeal?
Well, he can bring the claim, but I can't imagine it being successful. Judge Lewis Kaplan faithfully applied Federal Rule of Evidence 415, which was specifically enacted in order to allow past sexual assaults to come into evidence in cases alleging new sexual assaults.
A pattern of behavior.
That was not a past sexual assault on that tape. That was disparaging women, grab them by whatever, but that's certainly evidence of misogyny, but it's not evidence that the person is going around raping women. So I actually had a problem with that ruling.
You did?
I thought that it was far more prejudicial than probative. And also the prior bad act witnesses, the women that got to testify, to some extent they can. But there were two or three other women that testified that, he assaulted me too, and then he called me a liar. So I think there are some grounds on appeal.
Well, it does establish a pattern of behavior.
Absolutely does, absolutely, and that's why the Carroll's attorneys brought it in. So I think that's where he's going to go with it on appeal.
Yeah, and it's interesting that he was just found liable for defamation, and he's on social media right now repeating a lot of the exact same claims that he was
can't help
ordered
himself.
to pay $5 million. Okay, Sarah Azar, Mitch Epner, and Mark Caputo, thanks so much for your insight and analysis on this breaking news story today.